everyone, and welcome to episode 12 of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. It is a dark and gray day for podcasting today, but I really wanted to record, so I took the liberty of making my bookshelf a little more cozy with a lot of lights and candles, making it feel very autumny. And to make this episode feel even more autumny, the mug of the episode is not a mug today. It is my first pumpkin spice latte of the season. I am so happy these fall drinks are back at Starbucks. I absolutely love the pumpkin spice latte, and I admit that freely. So, cheers! It is my favorite fall drink, and I don't care if people think it's basic. I don't care if people think it's silly. I love them, and I'm proud to love them. So, I have finally finished my Astraeus sweater. I can't believe it's actually done. Oh, this was a labor of love, and it was a very tricky project to make. I have learned my lesson. I will never make a form-fitted colorwork sweater ever again. This has been such a difficult sweater to get to fit. It does fit enough to wear, which I'm very excited about. I did worry partway through the process if I would just suffer through wearing this for the engagement photo shoot and then never wear it again, which is honestly really, really sad, but will no longer be a reality, thankfully. But I have a lot of things that I've learned with this project, a lot of things that went wrong or that I definitely need to improve on in the future. But also some choices, I also made some choices that I probably should not have made, but I made them. This is the result, and I'm going to tell you all about it. So as you know from me mentioning it in previous episodes, I was making this sweater for my engagement photo shoot with Doyle, which is coming up very shortly. I did finish this before my deadline, which is awesome. I'm actually going to be wearing it to the PEI Fiber Festival next weekend, which I'm attending. So if you're going to be at the PEI Fiber Festival and you see me in this sweater, come say hi. I don't know anybody who is going, so I would love to see other people and chat. So to start with, there are two different varieties of the Astraeus sweater. There is the DK weight version and there is the sock weight version. Now, when I was planning this project, I did plan to do the sock weight version. But when it came time to actually starting this project, I didn't have enough time to make an all-over colorwork sweater in sock weight yarn. So I switched to the DK weight version. But then that created a hiccup because I had bought specialty yarn for this project and I had bought it in sock weight. Or technically I'd bought it in fingering. So I'm talking, of course, about the absolutely beautiful Explorer Knits and Fibers Court of Dreams yarn, which was Allie's Akatar variegated color yarn. I also have some of the companion tonal, which is To the Stars Who Listen, which I do have a project that I want to use that for coming up. But I knew I wanted to use this yarn for the project because I made Doyle sweater also out of Akatar themed yarn. That one was Red Door Fiber Studios Resand colors. And I knew that I wanted us to be wearing sweaters that would go together but were not the same. So I thought I would use Kate's yarn for Doyle's sweater and Allie's yarn for my sweater, which is what I ended up doing because you've already seen Doyle's sweater in my previous episode. So I had a bit of a struggle switching from the sock weight to DK weight because now I had to hold my yarn double. And I had bought enough yarn to make the sock weight version plus a little extra. I had less than I needed for making a DK weight version because I had 5 skeins, which are 400 yards each. So I had about 2,000 yards, but now I had to hold it double. So I only had about 1,000 yards of my main color to use. I had plenty of the white, which is Lion Brand Vanna's Glamour, and this is the color Diamond. It is a discontinued color, so you can't get it anymore, unfortunately. But I knew I had plenty of that. I was not worried about that in the least. I was worried about my main color. So because I didn't have quite enough yarn to make the pattern as written, I had to make some modifications. So modification number 1, I chose to make it a crop sweater. I knew if I was making it to wear in our engagement photo shoot, I'm going to wear probably a high-waisted skirt. I'm not going to wear jeans. I'm going to wear something a little fancier. So I can get away with making it shorter because I'm going to have a bottom that will come up higher, or I might even wear a dress underneath it. In either case, I'm not going to have to worry about my belly hanging out in my pictures. So there we go. Modification number 1, save myself a couple inches. That's going to save me some yardage. The second modification that I chose to make is I chose to make a smaller size than I would normally make. So I've talked in the podcast about how my bust shifts depending on, time of the day or time of the year. It really varies. I always measure before I make a pattern just to be sure what my bust is at that time. But it can range between about 48 to 51 inches. I think right now it's actually closer to the 51, maybe even a little higher than that. And I chose to make a size of the sweater that would give me negative ease. Because I thought to myself, that would make it nice and form-fitted. It's only like 1 or 2 inches negative ease. It shouldn't be a problem. So I chose to make the 48-inch bust sweater. And that was not the best decision I've ever made. And my third planned modification, which I actually didn't have to do, was I would shorten the sleeves. So my contingency plan was, if I can't get full sleeves, I'll get 3/4 sleeves. If I can't get 3/4 sleeves, I'll take short sleeves. So I had this planned, and if it didn't work out, I have a closet full of other sweaters. I could choose something else. It wasn't the end of the world. So I started making the sweater. And from the get-go, it was fairly good. I was a little nervous getting started with the color work, but it really wasn't bad at all. I said to Doyle at the time, I made a funny comparison. I said knitting color work is like popping your cherry. You are so nervous leading up to it, but once you finally do it, it is nothing to be afraid of. So please enjoy that lovely comparison that my weird brain made when I was doing color work knitting. Most of the time it was fairly even with where your floats were and where your stitches were. Funny enough, I found the rows where the stitch was really, really close. So for example, this row along here, where it really is 1 stitch blue, 1 stitch white, 1 stitch blue, 1 stitch white, those were a lot harder on my hands than, for example, the row of the moons, which was, let's say it's like 7 stitches white, 4 stitches blue. It gave my hands a chance to relax more when there were longer sections versus when the sections were very, very close. And that's because I'm an English style knitter, and as hard as I try, I just can't hold a yarn in my left hand. It feels like my hand is a claw. It feels like the yarn is going to be loose or too tight no matter what I do. So it's just too difficult for me, so I don't bother. So what I ended up doing is I wound one of my strands around my hand like normal. So the way that I normally hold my yarn is that I put the loop around my middle finger, and then it's in between my thumb and pointer finger, and I just lift it up for each stitch. And I found when I was using 2 colors, what I would do is I would still have that yarn looped around my finger and coming through my pointer finger and my thumb, and I would have the secondary color just hanging out in my hand, coming up between my pointer finger and my thumb. So I had more control over my main color than I did with my secondary color, but it was easy to just sort of like drop my main color back over my pointer finger and pick up the second color with just my pointer finger and my thumb and loop that around. So having to go back and forth between both colors, pretty much stitch by stitch by stitch, meant that I was getting a much tighter tension, and it was a really hard row to do for my hands because my hand was very tight, very clenched up. I really had to relax a lot after doing this one little section. Versus when I did the moons, totally fine. Didn't bother me at all. The one section of this color work that I found not necessarily difficult to do, but the hardest to get a good tension was this starfall section down here, which happens to go across the apex of my bust, as well as along my upper arm, which are the two largest parts of my upper body. This section is the tightest section of the entire sweater. I will never do a motif like this again because it means you have absolutely zero stretch. Now, I'm not an expert in how color work, tension, and floats work, but my inexperienced color work brain thought this when I was going through the pattern. In these sections, your floats are stranding across the exact same point across the entire section of knitting. Versus, let's say, these little stars up here, you're using your colors at different instances in the row. So your floats are going across different parts. So instead of all being in a row like this, your colors are staggered. Your strands are staggered like this. And I feel like that just allows for better stretch because, as you can see, this spot stretches so much easier than this spot. So that's something that I don't want to do again. It's not a good option if you want stretch to your knits. So I don't think I'll do that motif ever again because I really struggled to get proper tension and I really struggled to make my garment stretch when I finished it and when I blocked it and everything. I'll get into blocking a little bit later. I'm going to continue talking about the pattern right now. So I made all these modifications and I encountered all of these issues while doing the project. The one issue that is the most visible, even after blocking and everything else, is the row where I switched from the yoke to the body and the sleeves. And that row is in this starfall section. So as you can probably guess, that particular row is the tightest row on this entire sweater. And unfortunately, it cuts right across the largest part of my body. So it means that it's tight, especially because I chose to go a size smaller than I would normally make. So I learned that this starfall section is quite tight when I was doing the sleeves. Now, what I chose to do, because I wanted to finish all the color work first and then just get to doing plain one color stockinette, I wanted to get all the hard parts over with and then relax a bit, finishing up with the easier parts. So after I did my first arm, I tried on my sweater and I realized this is so tight. Like, this is uncomfortably tight. I don't know if I can wear this tight. I will suffer through it while wearing it for the engagement photos, but otherwise I probably will never wear this sweater. Then I moved on and I did the second arm. Now, I thought to myself, is it just me? Is it just my tension? Or is it this size that I'm making, this pattern, etc.? Is there a reason why this is so tight? Let me see if I can try and fix it with the second arm. So when I did the second arm, I really exaggerated my floats. I made them super, super loose, super long, the best that I could possibly do with the situation. And it ended up not being as tight. It actually was quite comfortable. So I thought to myself, I'm going to hate this, but I will love it afterwards. I'm going to rip back the first arm and I'm going to redo it, and I'm going to do it with much looser floats. So I did that, copied the exact same thing that I'd just done on the second arm with the first arm again. So technically, I knit 3 biceps on this sweater. It's all good. I have a much more wearable sweater now than I did then, and that's what counts. So sometimes it's really not worth it to put in the work to fix a mistake in a sweater. This is one of those instances where it was definitely worth the work because I have a wearable sweater at the end, and that's what counts. So once I'd finished both my arms, my upper arms where I had the color work, I started to do the stockinette arms. And this pattern isn't the best with what it thinks your measurements will be for different sections. So I do gauge swatch. I gauge swatch every time. And I gauge swatched for this pattern in the colourwork. And I got gauge pretty spot on. So I was very, very happy about that. Now, one of the things that I don't put a lot of faith into is row gauge. And that's because row gauge is so completely different for everybody. It's almost impossible to get the exact same row gauge for every pattern. So, and that's an easy one to fix too. If your row gauge is too small, just knit more. If it's too big, knit less. So it's an easy one to fix. I kind of forgot about what my row gauge was. So when I was doing the pattern, it said to do all the decreases. Once the decreases are done, you should be ready to do your cuff. It's hard for you to see. I can see it here. This is my last decrease row on my sweater. I was not ready to do a 1 to 2 inch ribbed cuff at this time. So what I did when I finished the decreases is I just knit straight until I was happy with the length, and then I did my little cuff. I will say I really love having these nice fitted sleeves. This is not a style that I've done before, or at least not on purpose, and I really like it. So I think I'm going to look into doing more fitted sleeves for my future garments, just because I really like how comfortable it is and how nice it fits on my arm versus, a baggy sleeve. I know balloon sleeves and puff sleeves and bishop sleeves are all in right now because volume is in as a trend, as a fashion trend. But I'm really loving this fitted sleeve. So although it's not exactly the way the pattern said to do it, it works for me and I'm happy with it. So I do have one really big glaring question about this pattern / criticism, and that's that I think the underarm instructions are wrong. This could be just my own opinion, but when you divide the body and the sleeves, you are in the middle of doing the starfall pattern of the colourwork. And of course, when you put your arm stitches on a holder, you then continue the colourwork underneath the sleeve. So when you cast on stitches for underneath your underarm for the body, you have to stay in pattern. So you have to cast on so many of the blue and so many of the white in order to keep this starfall pattern correct. So it might be difficult for me to show, but you can see that the starfall pattern continues down the underarm of the sweater. When you go to pick up your stitches for the sleeves, it doesn't tell you to cast on the same number of stitches that you did under the underarm on the body in order to keep the starfall pattern correct. It told you to just pick up a very small number of stitches versus the number you needed to keep the pattern. I was really confused about that, and I didn't want my underarm to look incorrect pattern-wise. I didn't want to have the proper number of stitches in between on the outside and then have just like 2 in between on the inside. I thought that would look kind of strange. So instead of casting on the small number of stitches that it told me to, I casted on the same number that I would need in order to keep this colourwork pattern correct. Which you can see, I have an equal number of blue stitches in between white stitches. And I'm also really glad I did this because I had that problem with the upper arm fitting. So it ended up being a blessing in disguise of casting on a number of stitches that I thought was correct, not the number that the pattern tells you to cast on. So that's my only really glaring problem with the pattern. Every other thing that quote unquote went wrong with this pattern that I then fixed was my own doing, such as not having enough yarn, changing the lengths of everything and fit and all that. It's all my own fault because of the choices that I made. But I accept that and I have moved on from it. So after all that trouble, I will admit this sweater looks stunning. I am super, super happy with the fit, which I have such a great fit because of blocking, which I'll get into in a second. But I'm also really happy because I love the colors. Now, I had this sparkly white Vanna's Glamour in my stash since it was discontinued, which I believe was maybe 4 years ago, because I got it at Michael's when they had it on clearance, and I just bought up a bunch of it because I loved the sparkle. There aren't very many sparkle yarns out there that look as impressive as this yarn, because this has a strand of metallic thread in it. It doesn't have stellina. Personally, I find stellina just isn't sparkly enough if I want a sparkle yarn. So I'd had this in stash for a long time, and I had originally thought I was going to just destash it after I'd had it for a few years and nothing came along. And then I saw this pattern, and I just thought to myself, if I'm going to make a celestial colorwork pattern, I should really hang on to that sparkly white yarn, because that's going to be perfect. Now, the original sample of the pattern uses this beautiful dark blue, dark purple night sky colored main color yarn and a gold contrasting yarn, almost like a brass color. It's absolutely beautiful, and I love it on all the people that have made it. But I knew for myself I wanted to use white because of the moons and the stars, which to me are sparkly white, and I had sparkly white yarn, so I chose that. And when Allie announced her Akatar colored yarn, Court of Dreams, it was a match made in heaven in my mind, so I had to get that yarn. I was absolutely gutted when I missed out on it the first time. I just was not fast enough to buy the yarn in her first pre-order of it. If you've never bought yarn from Explorer Knits and Fibers before, you are extremely lucky you have never had your heart broken. Her yarn is incredibly popular. I wasn't the only person that was completely gutted from missing the yarn the first time, which is why Allie offered it again. And the second time that it was available, I swear to God, I have never checked out so fast on a purchase in my life. And this was at like 10 o'clock p.m. my time, and I had to get up for work at 6 a.m. the next day. It was a rush, and it was hard to come down from that rush. I was very tired the next day at work, but I got my yarn. That's all I cared about this time. Then I waited so long to get it because it just, for whatever reason, my yarn went to Los Angeles and sat in Los Angeles for 3 weeks. God, I will never understand the U.S. Postal Service to Canada. Like, why did it go from Colorado to L.A. and then to Nova Scotia? Like, what? I don't get it. And why did it have to sit there for so long? All of this to say, Explorer Knits and Fibers yarn is some of the best yarn I've ever used color-wise. Like, I absolutely love the color. I will say I do wish I had bought one of her other varieties of yarn that she sells, such as her cashmere sock or her Rockies DK. This is the 80/20 superwash merino and nylon, and I just find that it's very much a workhorse yarn. It's a sock yarn. It's meant for socks. It's durable. It's going to last a long time, but it's not the softest. It's not the coziest. Of course, it's still warm. It's very warm, especially with all these candles behind me. I'm quite warm. But, I just wanted something a little softer. So in future orders from her, I will buy other bases. I'm also noticing this is only the second day that I've had this sweater on. I finished it on Friday and I blocked it yesterday, which was Saturday, and today is Sunday. And if I hold my sleeve up, I can start to see some nubbiness. So that's really unfortunate that it's getting fuzzy already. But before our photo shoot, I will just make sure that I take my gleaner to it, and I really take off all the fuzzies before our photos. It's not the end of the world. Pretty much every sweater I've ever made gets fuzzy. But it is kind of annoying that it's fuzzing on day 2. Now, the most important thing about knitting colorwork sweaters is that you absolutely must block them. And this is not me being up here as the blocking police saying, you should block your knits. It's not that at all. It's the fact that colorwork knitting doesn't really show its true colors until you block it. And that was not intended to be a pun, but I realized afterwards that it was a pun. And that's because when you're knitting colorwork knitting, it gets all scrunchy and bunchy, and it doesn't relax and spread out until you block it. You can either steam block it or you can wet block it. And I knew because I wanted to get as much stretch out of this as possible, I chose to wet block. Now, I recorded a whole segment about what my sweater looked like before I blocked it and what it looked like afterwards, so I will insert that here. Hi everyone, my Astraeus sweater is done, but as you can see, it is not yet blocked. I wanted to show it to you before I blocked it so you can have an idea of how much blocking really helps, especially with your colorwork knitting. Now, I'm no expert at colorwork knitting, but I do know from seeing other people's posts and learning about colorwork knitting that it's pretty important to block them because that's how you're going to get that really even stitching on your colorwork. Right now, it's pretty puckered. I'll come closer and give you a sneak peek. Here is a closer look at how puckered the stitch work is. If I just sort of stretch it like this, you'll see that it does become more even, but of course I need blocking to do that for me. I'm specifically going to wet block this sweater, and that's because I really want to get as much stretch out of this as possible, and it's easier when the yarn is wet. Quite cropped. You can see it's only hitting the top of my jeans right here. And these are high-waisted jeans. This is my natural waist right here. I'm hoping to get a little more length, but it is always going to be a cropped sweater for me. I learned the hard way, don't make a form-fitted colorwork sweater. And that's because there are certain areas where the floats are tight and they just can't stretch enough in order to fit comfortably around my body, especially around the largest parts of my body, which are my bust and my upper arms. And unfortunately, the tightest part of the entire colorwork pattern is at my bust and my upper arms. And that's this section right here, which is the start of the starfall of the colorwork. It's a beautiful motif, but unfortunately, because your floats are going across the exact same point versus up here, where my floats are going in different order, it's really, really tight. And unfortunately, that happens to be at my bust line and in my upper arms. Now, when I started my sleeves, I found out that I did too tight of an arm. And when I did my second sleeve, I managed to get it bigger by being super exaggerated with how loosely I was holding my yarn and how loosely I was carrying the floats. So I went back and I then did the first arm again in order to make that fit better. But there's one line of the arms that I can't fix, and that is where I divided my body in sleeves, that one row. So that row is right here and right here. And I honestly cannot fix that because the only way to fix it is to go back and redo it, and there was no way on earth that I was going to undo the entire body of my sweater and both sleeves to fix one row of color work. So when I block it, I'm just going to stretch it as much as I possibly can, but unfortunately I will probably always have this line across the sleeve of my sweater, which when my arms are down, you don't notice, and it doesn't pull when my arms are down straight. But as soon as I lift my arms, I start to feel the tightness of the yarn, and you can see this little pucker. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And I have a wearable sweater in the end. It's just not as wearable as some of my other sweaters. And I have learned lessons that I will take forward in my knitting. So let's give you one last look at the pre-blocked sweater. So I'm hoping to get a few more inches of length and some more inches of width. So I will now show you what it looks like after blocking. And here I am in my fully blocked sweater. I put this out on the deck today to dry because it was a beautiful sunny day and it dried in a few hours, which was awesome. I'm mostly happy with the results. There's only a few things that I want to fix a little bit, and it's easy to fix, so I'm not worried about it. Overall, I'm really happy with the changes that I got out of blocking the sweater. First, my waistband of my jeans is right here at my natural waist, which is where the sweater ended before blocking. And as you can see, there is about 2 to 3 more inches to the sweater now, which makes it a little more comfortable. I know it was meant to be a crop sweater. I always intended it to be a cropped sweater, but now it's just like a little more comfortable. I'm not worried about riding up, which is great. Very happy about that. The color work really evened out nicely. I'm very happy with that. And I am surprised that I did get quite a bit of stretch from this little starfall section. It actually blocked out quite nicely. Obviously I didn't expect to get a lot of stretch from it, but I got enough. It's actually not as tight on the arms as it was before I blocked it. But of course I do still have that pucker line that I told you that I had pre-blocking, which I expected to still have after blocking from splitting from the sleeves and the body. But it's not as bad as it was. I will say that I noticed after blocking, the starfall section is tight across the back of the sweater as well, which is something that I didn't notice when I was trying it on pre-blocking. But it's not the end of the world. It's still not the most comfortable sweater. I probably won't reach for this all that often, but it's much better than it was previous to blocking. Now, the 2 little things that I need to fix about it are, first, there's 2 little puckers, one here and one here, from where I pinned the sweater out when I blocked it. Those are super easy fixes. All I need to do is just flatten it out and use my steam blocker to just soften that back into a flat aspect of the sweater versus these 2 little points on the sides. And the other aspect is that my sleeves grew, and that was not intentional. I actually was very happy with the length of the sleeve pre-blocking. However, I made the mistake of not measuring the length of my sleeves before blocking, and when I went to block it, they grew, which is entirely my fault because I forgot to measure the length of my sleeves pre-blocking. But this is also an easy fix. What I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the sleeves as they are now, and I want them at least an inch shorter, maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches. So what I'm going to do when I have more time is I'm going to wet just the sleeves, and then I'm going to pin them out and make them shorter than they are now, which is an easy fix. But here is what my sweater looks like after blocking. I also got a little bit of width out of the body of the sweater. I didn't need it, but it is nice to have because it just feels a little less constricting, a little more just like hugging my curves, not cinching my curves. So it's not negative ease anymore, it's neutral ease, which is 0 ease. So the fit feels more comfortable now, and I still get the look that I was after of a lovely form-fitted colorwork sweater, which I now know I will never make again because it was not the best idea. But I have my sweater. Now, as you can see, there were huge changes between the pre-blocked sweater and the post-block sweater. And I am so much happier with it post-blocking. It really looks so nice and it's much more comfortable. Like I said in that segment, I'm even impressed at how much more comfort I got out of this upper arm section and the bust section. But even just the length, this is the perfect crop length sweater for me without feeling uncomfortable. And if I find that it's just slightly longer than the skirt that I'm wearing underneath, super easy to just tuck it in to the top of the skirt. Now for the question that I'm sure you've all been waiting for. Will I make this again? I probably will not make this sweater again. It was such an ordeal, especially the route that I took. This is nothing against the pattern itself, other than my one criticism about the underarm stitches being incorrect. This was such an exhausting project to make, and I just don't want to feel that way again. This was so exhausting that I have had almost zero desire to knit since finishing this sweater. I had everything done except the bind off before Doyle and I went on vacation, and I took another project to start while we were away. I managed maybe an inch of it. I was just so not into it. I was so not into knitting. I've been doing a lot of reading, which you will find out when I do my book review at the end of the episode. But this was just such a tiring project, and it really made me question why I did this to myself again. Why did I give myself a deadline project again, knowing I don't like deadline projects? Why did I choose a project that was really complicated, knowing I only had a certain amount of time to work on it? Why did I choose a project that required a lot of alterations and a lot of guesswork and yarn chicken and all of that stuff? Why did I give myself this added stress? This is my hobby. This is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be stressful. I guess I'm just one of those people that is always going to make the choices that are not always the best for me when it comes to my craft. So I haven't quite learned my lesson. I probably will never learn my lesson because I do have an upcoming project that I'm going to be making, which is another very complicated project. But hopefully I will not have the other bad things that accompanied this project in that one. Hopefully that will be not as challenging of a project, but I have heard the pattern is quite difficult, so. But I really want to make it, and I'm making it for a special occasion, but you'll have to find out what it is and why in a future video. For right now, let's get back to the Astraeus sweater. No, I won't make this pattern again, but I will say I absolutely love the celestial motif. There's only a few patterns like this out there, but this was the one that I gravitated towards the most. This was the one that I felt really spoke to me and was the most my style. There's a couple others out there, but they just didn't speak to me, or I thought there was too much of the contrasting color and I worried that I wouldn't be able to get the whole design out because I might not have enough of my contrasting color. I have more of it left over than I thought, but there's still not a lot of it. So I think I made the right choice with doing this sweater. And one of the reasons I did choose it is that the motif at the bottom, I've already mentioned it, it is called the Starfall motif. And that really spoke to me because I was making this as an ACOTAR inspired sweater. And in the second book, A Court of Mist and Fury, which is my absolute favorite book of the series, and it is probably one of my favorite books of all time, if not my most favorite book of all time, there is an event in the book called Starfall. So that's why I gravitated towards this pattern, and that's why I chose this one. And who's to say that the others would have been any easier than this one? So decision was made. I have a sweater. It is a wearable sweater. It is beautiful. I am very, very happy with it, but I am so glad it's over. And now for some book reviews. So the last time I recorded, I had just started a new book that was the first in a series that was recommended if you enjoyed ACOTAR. I have since finished that book, which was the first in the series, as well as book 2 and book 3, and I am now on to the first in the prequel series, and I will get to that when I start talking about these books. Now, I don't want to give anything away because these are very popular books and I'm not sure everyone has read them, but they are the Blood and Ash series. The first one is called From Blood and Ash. The second one is The Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. And the third one is The Crown of Gilded Bones. First off, it is so hard to remember the titles of these books. I had no idea what the title of the second one was for the longest time. Every time I looked at it, it's like, oh, that's just Blood and Ash book 2. But I will say that even though the titles are hard to remember, these stories are pretty fantastic. The story, I realized after I recorded my last episode, I actually didn't tell you anything about the story whatsoever. So I'll at least give you a little rundown of how the first book starts, and you can see if it's something that you would like to read for yourself. So the story focuses on Poppy, who is the maiden of this kingdom. She's born into a fantasy kingdom where she is the chosen one, and that means that she is very special. She has some magical powers, and she's very protected. In a way, she's very much a prisoner. Being the maiden means she's pretty much a prisoner, but she's led to believe that it's for her own safety. It's because she's this very special, important person. And then she learns everything she thought about the world she lives in is totally and completely wrong. I will say nothing other than that, because it's really exciting how you learn all of the things to learn about this story. But I will say, these are incredible character books. I am a type of reader who reads for characters. If I start a book and I do not like a character, I'm probably going to give up on that book, because that's how important characters are to me. I honestly don't really care if the world is fully fleshed out. I don't really care if the conflict is all that good or not. If I'm reading about good quality characters, that's all that I care about. And clearly I care about these characters because I have read the first 3 books since my last podcast episode. And before my last episode, I had been going through a reading slump. I am going through a reading feast now. So I don't want to give too much away because these are popular books, because I want people to be surprised if they choose to read them. But there's one thing that I will tell you about these books. There is a very specific reading order. Now, I know this because I am a big fan of Kate from Red Door Fiber Studios, and she told me what order to read them in. It's basically the published order of the books. So there is one main series, which is going to have 6 books. It currently has 4. And then there is a prequel series that I can't remember if it has 2 books or 3. There's one that's already published, and then there's a second one that's coming out in November, and I can't remember if there's a third one or not. But you need to read them if you want to get the most out of this story as possible, you need to read them in the published order so that you get all of the excess information. So the way that you read them is you read books 1 to 3 of the original series, then you read book 1 of the prequel series, then you read book 4 of the original series, and then you read book 2 of the prequel series. So I am now on to book 1 of the prequel series, and I highly suspect that I'm going to enjoy the prequel series the tiniest bit more than the original series, just because I'm really excited about all the information you're going to learn in it and how that will relate to the original story, and it'll just make it a much richer reading experience. So the prequel series essentially takes place, I think, several hundred, if not like 1,000 years before the events of the main series, but it involves the gods of this world. So that's not giving anything away. You already know that. But it's just, it relates to things that happen in this series. And you understand more if you read the prequel series along with the regular series. That's what I've been told by Kate. And after reading these 3 books and then reading the back of the prequel series book 1, which I've only just started, I'm only like 20 pages into it, but just reading what it's going to be about, I definitely understand why you read these, then you read the prequel book, and then you go back to the main series, because I can already tell there's going to be some really juicy information, and I'm super excited for it. So those are my first book reviews, but they are not my only book review. For those of you who watch my podcast who are not fantasy fans, I also have a book for you. Recently, I saw a trailer for The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, and it reminded me, I read that book a while ago, and I really loved it at the time. So I thought, well, now that I've just seen the trailer and I know it's going to be a movie soon, I want to reread the book. So I picked this up from the library. And I just have to say, this is such a beautiful little book. It's just a short one. It's only 250 pages-ish. Goes really, really quickly. I actually read this in almost one sitting. I had started it Friday night before we went to bed. I only read about a chapter or 2. And then I read the rest of it all day yesterday when we were sitting outside. And I don't think I remembered how good it was. It's just such a beautiful story. It's really unique. it's got a lot of heart to it, and it has just a really eclectic cast of characters, and it's impossible not to love these characters. But they're all really unique people. They're really interesting. The story is centered around a man named A.J. Fickery who owns a bookstore, and he has recently been widowed, and he's just kind of formed into like this curmudgeonly old man who runs a bookstore and has his own tastes and thinks that his tastes are the best. He is kind of arrogant. And it's sort of about how he remembers how to love again. I won't tell you how he learns how to love again, because it's such a unique way, and it's such a unique story to tell that I just think you need to read it to find out for yourself. But if you want a non-fantasy book to read, I highly recommend The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery. And I'm hoping the movie is good when it comes out too, because this is such a delightful story. It'd be really sad if they did a really crappy version for a movie. But you know what? It's been done before that they've taken a really good book and turned it into a not so good movie. So I'm reserving judgment until I see it, but I was very excited based on the trailer, so can't wait to see that when it comes out. And that is it for episode 12 of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. Thank you so much for joining me if you're new here, and if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. I have some special videos in the works coming out soon, and I'm very excited about some new content that I have coming out shortly, but you'll just have to wait and see and find out what that is. Until then, everyone, take care. Bye.